She wrote her dissertation on Oregon Student Voice in Kentucky, and is an amazing person and off to do some work with McREL. So it was fun to see some text from her while we're at this conference, because Sammy's remarkably sophisticated in the work that she does, and in her late 20s herself, I think. So what's happening with this transition to even more of a youth-led organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't say that it's been easy at all. I think something we realized as we were transitioning out of having that full-time adult advisor, and we have an interim person who we're contracting with at a smaller scale. But something we realized, we've been calling ourselves a student-led and youth-led nonprofit, but there's so much that happens behind the scenes that we kind of had a moment of reckoning when all of these small jobs needed to be taken over, and we realized how much we really did rely on that adult support, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Students are, going to school every single day and don't necessarily have the time to be scheduling meetings with legislators and, doing the community outreach and building these relationships and partnerships that, students can then step into those roles. But it's definitely been a difficult transition, having individual students take on more and more responsibility. So I think absolutely having an adult advisor who is there full time and who's fully invested, it's transformative for the organization and for allowing students to really step forward in, without wasting, I don't want to say wasting, but without, consuming so much of their time with more of the tedious behind the scenes tasks. So I think it is really, it enables students to do a lot more substantive work when you have an adult advisor who is able to step in those places.
I think that's a really key point in terms of thinking about advice for adult advisors, because when I interviewed Sammy, you would never see Sammy. She was always putting a young person first, which is what an adult advisor should do. But she said, my students are in class during the week, so my job is while they're in, first of all, she's like, I know all of their schedules. I know their free periods. I know when they're available for press calls. So if the press person wants to talk at 11 o'clock, I know that Grace can talk. And if it's at noon, I know it. But she's like, I organize. So I'm talking with the people during the business world who are there from 9 to 5, and then I'm figuring out which of my young people is available at which times to do the work. So she was kind of like this magician behind the scenes who knew from this really large group of young people who's at the core, who's available on what days and when to make it happen, and driving them back and forth to Eugene, Oregon to testify. She was on the road a lot, just shuttling people back and forth to those kind of things. So thank you. Let's go on to Jaden. So I met Jaden this January at a meeting at Facebook headquarters in California, and much like this meeting, this meeting was much bigger, and it was just a whole bunch of panels of people talking at us. It was really not a very learner-centered meeting, I would say, but Jaden made sure to ask a lot of questions to really, make people think. And so I made sure to find him, and we had a lot of fun touring Stanford and things like that afterwards, which was great. So tell us your story, Jaden. How did you get involved in this work, and what are some of the things you've done with Iowa?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel a bit out of my league here. Thank you to Kentucky and Oregon. But I'm the executive director of the Iowa Student Learning Institute this year. Weird name, nonprofit started by 2 freshman students who are now almost graduating college. So we've been around for about 6 years. I'll kind of save you the rest of the history for it, but we have 3 main programs that we kind of run. So we went through kind of a revitalization of the organization itself. So now we're centered on voice agency action. But in a way, we're very focused on the students themselves and trying to build up their own leadership skills and empower them to make policy changes within their schools. So very almost different from what these 2 groups do with kind of their state-led campaigns and their policy initiatives on the state level, where we're more training students within school districts, having them start what we call power voice groups to organize themselves within the school district, go to the school board and say, we want to see these changes. and we support them in those roles, and we help them kind of feel out where they need support. We fill in the gaps. And I kind of like to say I'm making mini me's and mini like us's where they get to go on and do even greater work after high school. We do have a similar organization that we are partnered with, though, called State of Iowa Youth Advisory Council. That's under State of Iowa. It's an advisory council of youth to the governor where they submit legislation. So we fill that role in Iowa with actually a separate entity that's under the state, which is nice because it means that we get to focus our work somewhere else. But I'm also a part of that organization, and through it, I was submitting legislation to have a mandate for student representatives on school boards across the state. So I did it my personal school board, thanks to Adam Fletcher for his research from Sound Out for helping me with that. But it's just policy initiatives like that, like what I did within my own school board, we're helping other students do right now, where they're adding student representatives, and then they move on from there to bigger issues within their schools. And it's not without its issues too, because we are totally student-led. I would actually say that it's backwards from most roles that we see, where it's the students providing support to our board of adults too. I'm actually putting together kind of a fundraising kit for the board right now so they can start to pick that up. But it's very much us. We lead team calls. We have a team meeting every other week, and it's so nice to just be in a situation where we can lead ourselves without adult intervention. They're there for us. They're willing to help whenever we need it, but it's not actually like somebody's impeding. We make all the decisions. We are doing.
Can you go a little bit deeper?
Yeah.
Who's the team and what kind of decisions are you making and about what?
Yeah, so we're a team of, I think, 7. We're small but mighty.
From all around Iowa or from?
Yes.
Okay.
Most of us are kind of within the metro, I think about 4 of us, and then we have about 3 or 4 scattered throughout. And so we have basically everybody has their specific duties. So we have a director of social media, we have other students that are leading programs for Power of Voice, so they're keeping in contact with those groups that we're starting up in schools. We're starting a pilot program for journalist fellows so that we can get students writing about the issues that are in their schools and push those out to the press that we have locally. Executive director, deputy director, we're still in the process of kind of shifting some of these. It's been an evolving kind of process over the years where we're restructuring our team, kind of like, it almost feels like every other month too.
So would you say the main focus is to try to get folks working within their individual schools, or there's something more collective at the state level right now?
Yeah, so I don't know why I forgot to mention this, but we host 2 conferences a year too. We bring students together in the fall for our RISE conference, where we do programming where it's much like this. We sit the students down, but they decide what the sessions they want to lead are. So much like we were doing with the Critical Friends in the open space, we have them lead the breakout sessions and volunteer to do that. And it goes really well. Every year we get about 100 to 150 students. And those are from across the state. So we're bringing all of them together, helping them with the programming. They pick their topics that they want to talk about for the issues in their schools, and we go to those groups and help provide resources and connect them to other groups that might be able to help them. And then in March, we bring them together for what we call the rally. And we go up to the state capitol. It's usually about a group of 100 to 150. And we have them go in and pick topics again, but they're talking to legislators this time. This is an experience that not a lot of students really get, even within the state of Iowa. Um, Even students within the metro usually have never talked to their legislators because they're fearful. They think that, they work for the state, they're too important for me, I don't matter, stuff like that. Am I going the way that I want?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, so when you're having those conversations with state legislatures, have there been any opportunities opened up, or did you feel like anyone was listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple legislators within the House that are very, very supportive of our work. I know Art State works very closely with us. He comes out and speaks to our students usually. And we get really good feedback from them. They love it when we bring students to the Capitol, and they're very supportive of the roles that students are playing in telling their stories and influencing policy, even though it's somewhat less organized than these two groups over here. So it's really nice to see the students, going up there, sharing their stories, sharing, yeah.
That's awesome, and I think what's helpful is to see, an organization in a state that's just starting to think about state conversations, as well as kind of states that have really kind of dug in and started to elevate that up. So it's important to see that spectrum, because you don't get from there unless you're starting with exactly what you're doing, of starting to make those visits, starting to have statewide meetings, starting to think about what it looks like as a state. And by the way, Jaden just graduated from high school and community college this month and is headed to Harvard, so congratulations to Jaden. Daniel Broken, who I know the least of this panel, and I'm thrilled to have him here. So Dan is in the process of earning his MA in Policy and Leadership with a concentration in student voice at the University of Minnesota, which is where Sammy just got her PhD, so go first. Dan used to be the voting representative for the Massachusetts Board of the Elementary and Secondary Education. So in Massachusetts, you get to vote, not here in Pennsylvania. And he's also served on the National Association of State Boards of Education. He was also the chair of the Massachusetts State Student Advisory Council, where he worked closely with students across the Commonwealth to create the first ever educator evaluation that actually incorporated student experience. So that's a lot. So tell me about sitting on these boards, and to what extent did you feel like you were a partner and could have a say in what was going on?
Absolutely. So I think a starting point for me was when I was on my local school committee. And I was just the liaison non-voting position, so I was kind of the token student voice there. I was expected to either talk about like the game that we had last night, or like a play that was going on, as opposed to talking about more substantive issues. So I kind of changed that in that role. And I remember at one point we were having an evaluation of the superintendent of our school district, and prior to that I reached out to students within my high school just to see like how they felt the superintendent was doing. And as I was bringing up the case of the students with how we understood the superintendent and how we were perceiving her work, I was interrupted by the chair of the school committee, and I quote, she said this, Dan, you do realize you're not actually a part of this. Seriously? Yeah, seriously. That was a seminal moment for me, because it really made me wonder, what is the role of students in education? I mean, the students are the largest stakeholder in education, and from there, that's what really got me motivated in the State Student Advisory Council, where after a few years, I was fortunate enough to be elected as the chair of the State Student Advisory Council. And just to kind of contextualize how this works in Massachusetts, this organization has existed since 1971, so it's one of the oldest, which is really nice. So it's very much ingrained in the organizational structure of the Massachusetts Department of Education, which is fantastic. So this was passed into law in 1971 by Governor Sargent, and it decreed that the chairperson of the State Student Advisory Council would be a full voting member on the State Board of Education. It's one of 4 states that have that, the other being Tennessee, California, and Vermont. So I realized that this was an incredibly unique opportunity, and the State Student Advisory Council is also one of the legal 18 advisory councils to the Board of Education. So we're mandated to provide a report at the end of the year, giving the perspective of the students as well as recommendations for policy that the board would adopt. Historically, some of the measures that the State Student Advisory Council have passed, in 1993, they advocated for the first LGBTQ anti-discrimination law in the country, and they crafted that and it got passed, which is absolutely incredible. In recent years, I know 2 years ago, one of the former chairs, their incredible work, they met with state legislators as well as the Board of Education to talk about cyberbullying. And they actually met, I forget the name of the state representative, but they met with him, who was a fierce opponent of any kind of cyberbullying law, saying that, you know, this isn't really impacting students the way we think it is. And so members of the State Student Advisory Council, they met with him and gave their own personal stories, and also reached out to other students that have experienced immense trauma and pain from cyberbullying. And they had a conversation with the state representative, and with that, that he changed his mind, which is pretty incredible and powerful. So, and then in the work of the National Association of State Boards of Education, we work to create a policy recommendation for other state boards of education for student engagement. So we crafted a report called A State of Engagement from NASB. And so this incorporated student voice, kind of being able to have constituencies, as well as the neurological kind of like background for why people get engaged and how we can contextualize this both within curriculum and pedagogy. So this was a wonderful report that got put out by incredible work from state board members from Guam all the way to Maine and everywhere in between. So,
And did you see any increase in student?
Roles in other states coming out of that?
yeah, so in the years past, there's 3 more states that I can think of that now either have some kind of statewide student constituency or partnership. I know Oklahoma recently just had a youth advisory council that was established. Minnesota Youth Council was established about a year after that report came out, I believe. And I want to say Oregon was after the report as well. So I don't know
do
if
they
that
have an official?
directly influenced or anything. I don't think it did, but.
We don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. So
maybe
I don't want to make
other...
claims that these were directly influenced or not.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, I thought it was incredible that at the time that there was the opportunity for student voice to be represented in that kind of report, because at the time I was the only student in that organization. So if you're going to write a report on student engagement, you should have more than one student present. So I was once again the token student there. And that's something I really emphasized. I said there really should be more students here who are writing this kind of report, because I'm not indicative of all the diverse voices of students. So I'm hoping that since that time that there's more student involvement, but I honestly don't know.
So 2 big questions come up for me. One is, so you were part of a state student advisory council that was a part of the government, right? And so I'm wondering, and you haven't been in both, but so we have like a government wing of youth voice, and then we have Pritchard was initially formed by a government, and they are like we want nothing to do with, like, we are independent, and Oregon Student Voice, we are independent. And Iowa is a grassroots initiative that is, we are youth-led, and we're going to figure this out. So what are you seeing as the advantages or disadvantages of being within a government structure versus independence? So I'll do that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason why this works particularly well, at least in the context of Massachusetts, is in addition to having the State Advisory Council, there's 5 regional advisory councils that inform the work at the state level and vice versa. So that kind of relationship is more cyclical than it is top-down. So students from the 5 regions of Massachusetts will come from local school districts, and as there's no cap on the regional participation. As many students that want to go can go, which is great. So in total, between the state and regional councils, there's about 300, 350 students that participate. So this allows, this structure really allows for this kind of communication and finding commonalities within pervasive issues for students. So I think that's one component of being ingrained in the state, that we are able to have the tools to be able to reach out to such specific levels across the state. Another reason why I think there's a strength is because we're mandated to provide a report. It's actually heard by the Board of Education. It's also heard by other stakeholders. It's recorded and documented. And this also gives us influence within the scope of state education. So we would have lobbyists come to our advisory council, since we are open meeting by law, so anyone's allowed to come in. So we would sometimes have the ability to reach out to some of these stakeholders, hear from them, so we corresponded. I don't think this would have been as common if it wasn't for this us being ingrained within the law and having this level of visibility. Not to say that it wouldn't be possible in Massachusetts, but I think it would have taken more time than having it legalized, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's pass down the mic. So thoughts about why stay independent versus become more involved with official structures? Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, ask him a question.
Why do you think that being ingrained in the governmental structure helps students to unlearn helplessness or to like assume power? Did